guys, welcome to another Wednesday video where I go through something a little bit different. I know I've done kind of a series of like fairy tale retellings, and then I went through some steampunk books, and what I'm going to go through this Wednesday is Lovecraftian type of inspired books. So these are ones that draw from Lovecraft's work or deal with kind of that Cthulhu, like dark madness type of theme. I don't know, for some reason when I think about steampunk, I kind of think about Lovecraftian driven stories. I have 17 different books, and some of them are part of a series that I'm going to talk through here. I did a little bit of searching on my own in preparation for this post, and there aren't a lot of sites out there that give you a decent list of like good Lovecraft inspired books. There are some, and honestly there were some books on there I hadn't read, so I have added those to my to be read pile. But I'm just going to focus on ones that I have read for this one, and these are in order from my most favorite to my least favorite. And quite a few of them I really did enjoy, and some of them you might argue aren't really heavy Lovecraft type reads. And the first one will probably fall into that for most people. Anyways, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the Iron Thorn, which is the first book in the Iron Codex series by Caitlin Kittredge. This includes 3 books. The second is The Nightmare Garden, and the third is The Mirrored Shard. It's a young adult book, and it is a dark fantasy, but it is a little bit lighter as far as Lovecraft elements would go. I really enjoyed it a lot. I give it 5 out of 5 stars, the whole series. So in this case, it's a city of Lovecraft. It's actually named the City of Lovecraft, so there's your first reference. The City of Lovecraft is ruled by the Proctors and powered by a great engine. There's a necrovirus that's blamed for an epidemic of madness that is affecting certain citizens. It's also said to be the cause of dark creatures that hunt the streets at night. It features Aelif, who's a ward of the state and one of the only girls to make it into the School of Engines, which is the most prestigious school in Lovecraft. Her family has a very dark history. They carry a latent necrovirus and generally go mad at their 60th birthday. Her birthday is just around the corner, and she has to kind of unravel the secrets of her family and face the darkness in the city of Lovecraft in order to stay sane. I really love this book. It's a very incredible world. It's interesting. It was never confusing, but it is kind of complex. There's a ton of really neat elements in the stories. I like the characters a lot. It was a really nice blend of steampunk, gothic, dystopian, mystery, and fantasy elements. And again, it does have a little bit of that dark madness, things lurking beneath the surface kind of vibe to it. The whole series does, and I really enjoyed it. All right, the second one I'd like to talk about is Deep Light by Frances Hardinge. I also gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, and it's not Hardinge, it's forget Hardin. Anyways, I will put the book over here so you can see the author's name. This is the first book by her that I read, and I really enjoyed it. This is a very Lovecraftian take to like a fantasy story, and it's appropriate for middle grade and older. It's about a boy named Hark, who is talked into yet another one of his friends Jelt's crazy schemes, and of course things go horribly wrong. As a result, Jelt gets grievously injured, and Hark finds the still beating heart of an eldritch god. The heart seems to heal Jet, but it's starting to do things to other people as well. And in addition to this, Hark is drawn to a separate mystery involving a military scientist that he's been indentured to. I really love this. It does have a very dark Lovecraftian tone to it because they do find this heart of this eldritch god under the ocean, and it starts doing things to people. The world was very intriguing. The storytelling was very good. And I really thought it was engaging, unique, and thoughtful, and I enjoyed it a lot. So I would definitely recommend Deep Light. All right, so this one is, I don't know. Yeah, it does have pretty good Lovecraftian vibes. And that is A Cosmology of Monsters by Sean Hamill. I read this last year, gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It is a weird book, but a very good book. It's about the youngest child, Noah, he's the youngest child in the family in the narrator's story. He takes us back a generation to explain how his mother Margaret married a horror science fiction Lovecraft obsessed man named Henry. When Noah is younger, things in his family kind of start falling apart. His sister has nightmares. His father gets very erratic. His mother is trying to hold the family together, both financially and emotionally. It's exhausting her. And then that's when a monster starts to visit Harry. It was a really great story, both about a family that makes living off of horror and creepiness and faces a lot of challenges, and about how their lives are wrapped around this mystery of missing children and large furry monsters. This story had so many layers, and it was just really, really well done. The ending was amazing. It was unexpected, but just perfect for the rest of the book. I love this book so much, and I'd really like to reread it at some point when I have time. Again, obviously the Lovecraft elements are, his father is obsessed with them, and then there's this monster that kind of leads to other things, and we'll leave it at that because that's a big part of the story. So Cosmology of Monsters was very good. All right, the next one that I would like to talk about is Ring Shout by P. Shelley Clark. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars as well. I absolutely love the story. It takes place in 1915 as the Ku Klux's rands are swelling and they're spreading fear and violence across the U.S. However, unknown to most of the public, the Klan is being led by demons called Ku Kluxes, and the Ku Kluxes have an even bigger plan for evil domination of the whole world. It's up to a woman named Maurice and her resistance fighters to stop this madness. It was an amazing concept. It tackles a lot of social issues while also being incredibly entertaining and well done. It's kind of a basic monster slaying fantasy, but it was done in a very beautiful lyrical way almost. I just love the story and how seamlessly it was woven to the history of time, and was very impressed with how Clark merged these demons and this Lovecraftian madness mentality into this whole era of the 1950s and that culture. It was just really well done and really perfect. It is a novella, so it's not a very long read, and it had a lot of impact for its length. All right, the next one on the list is one I wish the series would get continued, but it seems to have stalled, and that is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Great Cities trilogy, but it's been the first book in the trilogy for a long time. I did give this 5 out of 5 stars. The concept of this great book is a great one. Basically, stories have been written about cities being living entities before, but never quite in this way. The concept is that if a city becomes big enough and different enough, it manifests into a living creature. And in this story, we're introduced to 7 characters, 6 who become living representations of the boroughs of New York City, and 1 who becomes New York City itself. Unfortunately, there's another entity from a parallel reality that doesn't like these cities to become sentient, and that is kind of where the Lovecraftian eldritch horror theme comes in. I did really love this book. As I said, I gave it 5 stars. It did take me a bit of effort to get into. You gotta put some time in to read this one and understand it, but I felt like the payoff was definitely worth the effort. The concept and world building were really excellent. It's a great idea book. It introduces you some really fantastical elements involving personifications of cities and parallel realities, and at times there's a very Lovecraftian feel to it. I just really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it, and I really wish the series would continue. All right, the next one is another one I read last year, and it is a novella as well, and that is Flowers for the Sea by Zen E. Rocklin. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars too. I do think this will be one that not everybody likes because it gets pretty grotesque at points. The book basically starts out on a ship that's been sailing for a very long time. We're thinking hundreds of months at this point, years and years, with a woman who has been pregnant for a very long time, well over your typical 9 months. As the story unravels, we're trying to solve a number of mysteries, like why is our main character so disfigured? What happened to the people that made them end up on this boat? And what exactly is our protagonist pregnant with? It's written in a very beautiful, visceral, and eerie way, but it's also very different. You kind of have to concentrate while reading this and go back and reread things because there's a lot of little hints in there. Some of the things that happen are so bizarre that you kind of got to take a double take there to figure out what's going on. But if you want something that's really uniquely different, creepy, and disturbing, I'd recommend it. There is a lot of gore and a lot of rather visceral descriptions, so I would recommend for adults only. But it definitely had a very heavy, like, Lovecraft influenced twist to it at the end. And I feel like this list would not be complete without mentioning the next one, which is actually a graphic novel, and that is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Out of all of his graphic novels, I loved this one the most, and I felt like this one channels the most of that kind of like Lovecraft madness, crazy stuff going on. And I mean, the premise of this is a character starts seeing spirals everywhere and goes insane. And that's all I really need to tell people about it. It had a huge impact. I've read a lot of, Yosan's other books, and I just don't like any of them as much as I liked Uzumaki. It just made a huge impression on me, and it definitely has a very Lovecraft vibe to it. All right, this one is probably a little bit more of a Lovecraft light, and that is a recent young adult duology, These Violent Delights. The first book is These Violent Delights. The second book in the duology is Our Violent Ends, and this is by Chloe Gong. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed this a lot. It is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, and it did start a little slow for me. I'm not a huge fan of these like mobster historical fantasies. However, the 1920s setting was very unique. It's set in Shanghai. It's kind of a fascinating setting for the story. I was not expecting it to have this like Lovecraftian horror vibe to it. There are some like bugs that come out of the water and start infecting people with madness. It ended up being pretty creepy. So if you're looking for an intriguing like historical fantasy set in kind of an interesting historical exotic location that's a really cool time in history and has these creepy like madness elements to it, I would definitely recommend this. Again, this isn't like really heavily eldritch horror type of thing, but it does have pull in some of these elements of madness and the sea and all that kind of stuff. All right. The next book on the list is also one that is, people do reference it a lot of times as a Lovecraft inspired read. I think it's a little bit more of a stretch though, and that is 14 by Peter Clines. I give this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and it is part of his Threshold universe books that are kind of loosely connected. So The Fold and Terminus also are part of this world and deal with some of these Lovecraft elements, but I thought 14 by far was the best. So this is about a guy named Nate. He has a bad job. He doesn't have a girlfriend. He needs a place to live. One of his buddies from work tells him about this apartment that's super cheap. It's just a great deal. Nate calls. There's a unit available. He goes to live there. It's just cheap. It's clean. It's awesome. It's a dream come true until Nate notices glowing green cockroaches, a kitchen light that turns every light bulb into a black light, and padlocks on apartment 14. It's a very well done mystery, and it was pretty much impossible to put down. I love this book. It was so much fun. The characters are just ordinary people who get put into this really weird scenario, and it's all about this mystery of apartment 14. And once they get in there, boy, that's where your Lovecraftian elements come into play. So a fun one. It's just a purely fun one to read. The Fold was pretty good. I didn't like Terminus as much. I thought it was a little goofy, but definitely check out 14, and then you can decide if you want to read the other Threshold universe books by Clines. All right, the next one is one that I didn't rate quite as high, 4 out of 5 stars, and that is the Borden Dispatches by Sherry Priest. Sherry Priest is one of those authors I want to love. Like, I love her ideas, but I am not in love with her writing style. I did read the first book in this duology, Maplecroft. The second book is Chapelwood. This book takes place in the 1890s, and it's much more of a horror that goes, kind of cycles around the Cthulhu mythos. There's a lot about madness, murder, people going insane because of this dark invasive power. The book's done as a series of journal entries by a number of different characters. It's a good format. It does a good job at like slowly unrolling the mystery of this madness that's affecting the town. However, it makes it kind of hard to engage with the characters. It ties up very ambiguously, and that's part of the reason I didn't give it 5 stars. It's basically a series of Lizzie Borden is the main protagonist versus Cthulhu. So, that's kind of the premise there. And it was okay. I just don't love Priest's writing style. It's a little too stark for me. All right. The next one on the list is one I think I read last year as well, and I gave that 4 out of 5 stars, and that is What Big Teeth by Rose Zabo. This again is like pulls some Lovecraft elements in, but isn't just a direct, Lovecraft spinoff. It's an odd but well done book. It's about a girl named Eleanor who spent the last 7 years at boarding school but has to come home because of an incident that we don't really understand initially. The problem is she doesn't really fit in with her family, and her family is literally monsters. Like, they're werewolves and different types of monsters. She struggles to fit in, and there's like a big disaster, and she calls her French grandmother to come and help her deal with this. However, her French grandmother is something completely different, something completely beyond a monster. It was an odd book. I liked it. I didn't love it. I did enjoy unraveling like the weird little mysteries about Eleanor and like why she got sent home from boarding school. I love the monsters that were included as her family. But parts of it get a little bit out there, especially once her grandmothers get involved, and that's kind of where the Lovecraft elements come into play. But it was a fun little weird book. All right, the next one, definitely heavy Lovecraft influences. This one is Tide Pool by Nicole Wilson. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This was a very well done historical thriller mystery with heavy Lovecraft influences. It's an easy read, and I was very engaged in it the whole time. I did think it went just a little bit too long at the end, but it really tied up the story well. The story is focusing on a protagonist named Sorrel Hamilton who goes to the town of Tide Pool searching for her missing brother. And then what she ends up finding there kind of stretches the bounds of sanity and what she knows of the world. The story itself is a little predictable if you read a lot of Lovecraft types of horror. It's about, what dwells in the deep and the effect on sanity has on the humans around it. One thing I did really like about this is there's a priesthood involved in the story that protects humanity, but they have to do some pretty nasty stuff, like evil stuff, in order to protect humanity and the greater good. So it was kind of a fun, like, immoral balance that you were dealing with. So I really like that. It was a fun story, and would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a Lovecraft influenced read. All right, the next one is The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. This is a very short, I listened to the audiobook. It's like a 3-hour audiobook, very short. It's an odd book. It's a blend of horror, magic, and general depravity. It's about a guy named Johann who was born of the depravity of Elendhaven and likes to hurt other people. He then chanced upon a mage named Florian who really wants to see the people of Elendhaven suffer. They basically join forces to try to wreak as much havoc and misery as they possibly can. It's a weird read. It's strangely compelling. Elendhaven is very much the Lovecraft influence here. It's an abandoned mining town in a far cold north. The water is black. Everything there is always suffering. Anything that goes out to sea will come back different and changed and not quite right. It's a strangely compelling little book. It's definitely fantasy horror story, and it's about murder, plagues, magic, and 2 men who have formed this really tight relationship because they desperately want to hurt things. And it gets a little bit confusing, but I really like the city of Elendhaven, and I thought Johann and Florian were just fascinating, and just the weirdness of this was enough for me to overlook kind of some of the ambiguity and things that were a little bit confusing. It's not a huge time investment. If you are interested in weird, like, Lovecraft influence reads, I'd definitely check it out. All right, the next one on the list is a very popular one. If you are all interested in Lovecraft, you've probably heard of this or read it, and that is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. This is another novella. It features, the main protagonist is Charles Thomas Tester. He is trying to, like, hustle and get food for his father and their house in Harlem. It's in the 1920s in New York City. Tom runs a job delivering this occult book to a mysterious old woman, and the next thing he knows, he's being invited to sing for this old man for a lot of money, and he's a really bad singer, but he goes to do it anyways, and all of a sudden he's dealing with a whole bunch of weird, eldritch, evil stuff. It was really well done historical fantasy. I enjoyed the 1920s New York setting and the heavy Lovecraft elements, and then the whole story really kind of makes you think about, like, what life was like back then. I'd recommend this if you think that the whole Lovecraft theme set in a dark fantasy in the 1920s in New York sounds cool. Again, not a huge time investment, but a very well done story. All right, now we're getting the ones that I rated a little bit lower. These were 3 out of 5 stars. The first one I'm going to talk about there is The House of Salt and Sorrows by Aaron A. Craig. This is another fairy tale retelling, And this is actually a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses, but the main protagonist, Annale, starts having ghostly visions and finds a mysterious door to another realm. She's starting to wonder if her sister's deaths were really accidents. I did have a little bit of trouble engaging with the main protagonist, Annalise. She's very serious and tries to be very, very good. In general, this book is very serious and very dramatic, very like a young adult drama. The description was amazing, though. I never really had trouble picturing the characters or settings. There are very strong horror elements in here. It's very creepy, and some of the descriptions actually get a bit nauseating. I really liked how so much horror, madness, Cthulhu elements were woven into this classic fairy tale. It was very unique. I just didn't enjoy the writing style as much as I was hoping. All right, 2 more to talk about. Again, we're kind of at the bottom of the list here. The next one is another one that is very popular if you're into Lovecraft reads, and that is Hammers on Bone, the first book in the Persons Non Grata series by Cassandra Kah. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This is another novella. It's an investigative urban fantasy kind of blended with Lovecraftian horror themes. It's about an investigator named Persons who's paid by a boy to investigate his evil stepdad, Mackenzie. Mackenzie seems to be infected by something dark that's spreading through the city. As the story continues, we kind of find out Persons himself is not exactly human. I did enjoy the idea of a dark eldritch god like being a private investigator. I like the idea of him fighting other dark, evil things. I like some of the twists that happen in the stories, but the execution here leaves a lot to be desired. The writing does not flow. It's very disjointed, and sometimes you're like, what is going on? It makes me a little bit sad because I've read a couple things by Kah, and her writing just isn't there yet. Like, I just wish her ideas and her concepts could be written better, because I really like her concepts and the way she thinks through things. I just wish she could deliver it in a writing style that was a little more readable. All right. And the last one is one that you occasionally do see on lists of recommended Lovecraftian horror influenced books. And this is one I actually did not finish. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. And that is The Library at Mount Char. A lot of people have read this. I know it was very popular for a while. This is by Scott Hawkins. I was listening to this on an audiobook. I stopped listening to it about a quarter of the way through, about 25% way through, and returned it to Audible. Got my money back, got my credit back. It was just not my thing. It follows a whole bunch of people who are raised by a man known only as father. Father taught them to each be or represent a section of knowledge. And one of the characters you start with, Carolyn, is the catalog for language. However, something happened, father disappeared, and these adults are not functioning. They're very disturbed people, and they can't get back into their home since he's disappeared. So they are trying to track down father through manipulation and killing. The premise sounded interesting. Unfortunately, at a quarter of the way in, the story just seemed more about gore, visceral shock value. Like, I didn't find a lot of story there. It was just about people going around and hurting each other, and they didn't seem to have a lot of purpose. So it just didn't seem very cohesive to me, and I wasn't in the mood for it, so I stopped reading it. So that was not for me at all. I didn't find it psychologically or story-wise very interesting. So there you go. Those are the 17 books that I have read that have heavy Lovecraft influences to them. And if you're interested in that, I hope you find something here that you like to read. I know there are a number of lists online. And there are a few listed, like Lovecraft Country I have not read. I know that was fairly popular, so at some point I would like to pick that up. And there's a couple other ones on there that you see pretty frequently that I have not read that I will add to my to-be-read pile. But hopefully this helps you find some interesting read. We have everything from fairy tale retellings with Lovecraft influence to young adult books to novellas. It's kind of all over the place, historical fantasies. Anyways, with that, I hope you enjoyed this and you find something here you would like to read. If you have some Lovecraft books that you have influenced books that you've really enjoyed, please comment down below. I'm always looking for more of those. And with that, I will talk to you on Saturday for a Stacking the Shelves. Have a great week. Bye.